Raising kids is hard. It's extremely hard. I mean, not that I'm speaking from experience, as seeing I'm still a baby myself, but there's a reason we have that saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Because it does sort of take a community effort, combining forces with the parents, the teachers, and the extended family, and of course schools, to form a human being that is independent and can exist correctly in the world. Discipline is one of the most important things that need to be instilled in a child from the get-go. Too often we meet people in our adult life that have such uncouth and inappropriate behavior. And while we can't blame the parents for, what someone does in their adulthood, it's always clear, when you meet someone who wasn't raised in the best way. Child discipline, as a term, refers to the methods used to prevent future unwanted behaviors in children. Now, within this term, there is the word discipline. Discipline is the practice of training people to obey rules or a code of behavior using punishment to correct disobedience. Different dictionaries kind of have different definitions of the word, but they all essentially say the same things. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, discipline is training that makes people more willing to obey or more able to control themselves, often in the form of rules and punishments if these are broken. It even goes ahead to state that discipline as a verb means to punish someone. And according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, discipline is A, control gained by enforcing disobedience or order, B, orderly or prescribed conduct or pattern of behavior, C, self-control, and D, punishment. Now, if you notice, there is a common word that appears in all these definitions without fail, which is punishment. But what exactly do they mean by that? What is punishment? A quick Google search can show you that there are various definitions of punishment according to things like law, criminology, and all that. I could read all of them for you, but to be honest, I don't want you guys clicking out of the video 2 seconds in, I'm trying to viewer retention and all that stuff. So I will be focusing on child discipline, like punishment, according to child discipline and psychology, because I feel like it's, most relevant to the topic at hand. Punishment is the infliction or imposition of a penalty as retribution to an offense. So after getting to know that meaning of those two words, discipline and punishment, one could safely assume that, to discipline is to punish. One could assume that in order to prevent unwanted behaviors in a child, one must inflict a penalty for every offense, every unwanted behavior that child displays. And if that is what people assume discipline is, then is it really a surprise that corporal punishment has prevailed in the act of childbearing for as long as it has? Corporal punishment or physical punishment is the type which is intended to cause physical pain to a person. When inflicted on minors, it is usually inflicted upon them at school or at home by their caretakers and teachers. It can include spanking, like chiboko as it is called here in Uganda. This can be administered using chalkboard rulers, tree branches, bamboo sticks, broken pipes, and so on and so forth. I mean, people's creativity can really thrive when they want to beat people, Corporal punishment is administered under a variety of circumstances. Like I said, it's usually administered when a child does something bad or behaves in an undesirable way. Maybe they didn't lay their bed in the morning before school. Maybe they insulted an adult. Maybe they skipped school. Corporal punishment is the consequence of these actions in the hopes that the child will not perform the undesirable act again. So humans have been beating each other up for as long as they have been alive. This was the norm all throughout history, right until what is referred to as the Enlightenment era, which held a great focus on humanitarianism that led to a decline of the violent practice. So when it comes to talking about corporal punishment in Africa specifically, we have to look at 3 overarching sections: pre-colonial Africa, Africa under colonization, and post-colonial Africa. You will find that it is common when talking about Africa, when something happens to you and it impacts you so much that your life story becomes split into before that and after that event, before Christ and after Christ. This is what colonialism did to Africa. You cannot talk about Africa without talking about colonialism. It's impossible, as unfortunate as that sounds. Whether or not corporal punishment existed in Africa before colonialism is an issue that is heavily debated on, according to what I researched. Majority of the sources were of the opinion that no, corporal punishment in a form that it exists in today was not common practice in the pre-colonial era. Contrary to what one might think, beating our children is not and has never been a historic African tradition in the way we were made to believe. The culture of corporal punishment in Africa, as we know it today, was introduced during colonialism. Before colonialism, other forms of discipline were enforced by African parents that did not involve the pain and degradation that comes with corporal punishment. The colonization and occupation of the continent by Europeans, as well as the transatlantic slave trade that forcefully stole African natives from their homelands, was a terribly violent period of time. Colonial powers used corporal punishment as a tool to control Africans, and the cruelty of the practice has been injected into all aspects of Africanhood to this day. It was enforced in schools, in prisons, and while it may not have always been legal, it has always been used liberally by law enforcers, even in arbitrary ways whenever they saw fit. In the present day, corporal punishment is banned in various countries, but it still continues to be a common method of discipline in Africa today, because the culture, in its most brutal form, has been literally beaten into the structure, the very fabric of Africa, and the effects are still being felt to this day. Ugandan children, and really African children in general, experience corporal punishment both at home and at school. I personally haven't been in high school in 3 years, so I can't speak on what exactly is happening in these schools, but I'm sure not much has changed. Offenses that warrant such terrible punishments can range from crimes as severe as assaulting another student or theft to things as mundane as wearing the school uniform improperly or dozing in class. I definitely think the severity of the punishment differs from school to school, with traditional schools sitting on the worst end of the spectrum. I actually talked about traditional school in my very first video a couple months ago, if you're interested in learning about them. And it is no surprise that these schools are the worst offenders, seeing as they were all schools set up during or before colonial rule. And the thing about these punishments is that they are quite unregulated. I was reading a paper as I researched for this video titled "Spoil the Road and Spare the Child," examining the colonial and missionary implications of corporal punishment in contemporary Kenya. And something that stood out to me as I read this was that while the justice system in Kenya included corporal punishment, but this I'm talking about long ago because this study was done like in the 1919. This is not current day Kenya. I'm talking about like colonial time Kenya. And while their justice system included corporal punishment, it was regulated like a certain crime that like could warrant 3 strokes of a cane and another one could warrant 20 strokes, but like it was a specific number per crime. Like it hasn't even occurred to me that setting a specific number of strokes per offense could happen. These so-called educators in our schools just be out here beating children with all their anger that they come with from whatever their unhappy lives. I don't know. And I was wondering why schools never considered setting a specific number of canes. Like, I know my point, what I'm trying to make is that there should not be any corporal punishment. But like, if we have to have it, like if there is no choice, like at least there should be regulations. But like even that, I don't know why, like it never happened. And I was wondering, like, why didn't they try to have that consistency and like regulation to avoid misuse of power by teachers? Because teachers have misused power. And it wasn't until I was reminded, that corporal punishment is illegal. It's illegal in Uganda, and it has been for quite some time. So the first attempt to outlaw corporal punishment in Uganda were in the 1997 Children Act. But despite this, corporal punishment remained largely widespread in both homes and schools. The law allowed defense of reasonable chastisement of the child, which created a gray area that everyone just exploited. Then, the 2003 Prisons Act that came years later tried to take it a step further by banning corporal punishment as a disciplinary method in prisons. In 2006, the Ministry of Education and Sports issued a circular prohibiting corporal punishment in schools. Not sure what they mean by a circular, you guys. I don't do law, but anyway, yeah, they enforced this circular. As you may have guessed, this didn't really change anything. Like, schools were still beating our schools. Even they would tell us that for them they are not included in the rule. I think I was around primary at this time, and they were like, we are still beating you. Yeah. And the ministry did send out other circulars in both 2011 and 2015. But again, very little change was noticed, especially in faith-based and private schools around the country. Either people just ignored the rules, or they were just plainly unaware because, of course, minimal effort was put into actual enforcement of these rules. Then, in 2016, I think that's when at least a major step was taken, and an amendment was made to the Children's Act. And this time, corporal punishment was made an offense punishable by imprisonment or a fine. But this wasn't only in schools, as honestly, regulating homes is quite hard and would leave too many gray areas. So sometimes when I see or overhear a parent punishing their child or beating them, and the kid is, screaming because, they're obviously in pain, I wonder, what do these parents be thinking in that moment when they are inflicting physical pain on their offspring? Don't they feel a little bit of pain when they do that? But I know the answer, and you know it too. It's that mentality, that justification that we have had all our lives. That mentality and the justification that we are going to talk about in this next section is what I have named the spare the rod mentality. So in this section, I want to touch on the origins of the saying and how differing interpretations of the Bible led to the wrongful use of the saying as is seen today. As you may notice, this is a separate voiceover from the original video, and that's because the original recording I did not really explain as well as I wanted to. So I'm just coming back here to fix this section in so that I can record it with a clearer direction. So the full saying goes, spare the rod and spoil the child. And I am sure everyone has heard or have themselves used this saying several times in their life. In such a place like Uganda, which has a mostly religious population, and many of us are Christian, it's important for us to really understand the true origins of some of these phrases and Bible verses we quote to ourselves and to one another. So the phrase spare the rod and spoil the child is generally believed to have come from the King James Version of the Bible, Book of Proverbs, chapter 13, verse 24. But upon further research, this is not true to some degree. Like, it's not completely false, but it's not true to some degree. An article I found on the website gracethroughfaith.com was very helpful in explaining, and it states that this popular verse cannot be found in the Bible because it's neither a Bible verse nor is it a biblical principle. So where does it come from? Well, it turns out that it's from a 17th century poem by Samuel Butler called Hudibras. In the poem, a love affair is likened to a child, and spanking is commended as a way to make the love grow stronger. The actual verse where this popular saying, spare the rod and spoil the child, that we use normally is from a part of this poem that goes, what medicine else can cure the fits of lovers when they lose their wits? Love is a boy by poets styled, then spare the rod and spoil the child. This poem was very popular in the 18th century, and the phrase got adopted into many teachings, which essentially trickled into religions like Christianity and all that. And its initial reference to romance and other things I won't get into was co-opted to include children who were not willing participants. The adults that would participate in that were consenting, but children were not. And in the 18th century, corporal punishment was a common method for punishment in Europe, and it didn't take long for regular people to adopt it on their kids. But the Holy Bible does actually have a saying extremely similar to this one. As earlier mentioned, Proverbs chapter 13 verse 24 of the King James Bible is believed to be the origin of the phrase, but the actual verse as it is in the Bible, at least in the King James Version, goes, "Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him." And you might be side-eyeing me right now and being like, girl, that sounds quite similar to the normal everyday saying we use. And while you might think they are one and the same, they are in fact not. Because a lot of the time, when people make their own interpretation of the Bible, they forget sometimes that context is a necessary aspect. It's an important aspect of studying the Bible. Reading it in the time where it was written, like in the context of the time it was written. At the time period where this particular verse was written, what did it mean for the people to spare the rod and spoil the child? And should we be applying the centuries-old advice from that time to our modern-day problems? The article from Grace Through Faith explains my point. The Hebrew word for rod in this proverb describes a scepter or staff. A scepter was a large, ornately carved staff that was a symbol of authority. The article further states that the scepter was a symbol of tribal authority in the same way, for example, how the White House stands for the US government's authority, not like that. In fact, of the 190 times the word is used in the Old Testament, it's translated tribe in 140 of them, and other times it's translated to rod, club, shaft, or truncheon. The point is that it wasn't just a small cane like the ones we use today. It wasn't just a small cane that a dad could pick off a tree and give his son a light beating with. It was a huge and heavy club, a scepter. It was a huge club, and it doesn't make any sense that a child would be beaten with such a huge thing. Like, they were clearly not meaning it like that, like that he was actually beating the child with it. It was a symbol of authority. And also, the word discipline, as it is used in the Bible, is often translated to mean instruction or correction, and was never used to mean punish, at least in the context of the Bible. So, remembering that we are talking about a proverb where things are often symbolic, and that the rod symbolizes authority, not punishment, authority. The rod symbolizes authority. We should always interpret this one saying as follows: whoever fails to exercise his parental authority hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to instruct and correct him, not punish. It is the saying the saying as it is in the Bible. It's not about beating, beat your child until they understand. It's just a warning to parents to heed their responsibility as the people that instruct children and to train them, I hope I'm making sense. But this article was very helpful, and if you want to read through it, you can. I am linking it in the description down below for further information. So, what does psychology say about corporal punishment? Many who conduct and practice corporal punishment do not really understand the psychological impact of consistently beating their children when they make mistakes. The logic they use is that when I cane this child for failing exams, then the child will not fail exams again. Why? Because they will fear the consequence of failing again, and so this will push them to read harder. And as a result, the child will not read harder so that they gain knowledge. They will read harder to avoid getting beaten. They will read harder because they are afraid of the negative consequence of failing. And one could argue that if the end goal of the parent is good grades, and at the end of it all, the child has good grades, then hasn't it worked? But it hasn't, because at the end of the day, all you will have is good grades and a fearful child who associates the act of gaining knowledge with fear and pain. According to the World Health Organization, studies have linked corporal punishment to increased risk of depression, anxiety, and lower self-esteem. Corporal punishment triggers harmful psychological and physiological responses. Children not only experience pain, sadness, fear, anger, shame, and guilt, but feeling threatened also leads to physiological stress and the activation of neural pathways that support dealing with danger. Corporal punishment can disrupt the cognitive development and brain development of a child, where the stress of having to fear painful punishments for every little mistake can stunt their ability to do normal things like interacting socially with other people. Corporal punishment can also strain the parent-child relationships, where the children don't have any trust in their parents. They can't confide in them or communicate with them freely because anything that arises, they may fear that they might be punished as a consequence. The use of corporal punishment can create a circle of violence and abuse that is hard to break. The father was beaten as a child, and then they beat their child who beat their child who, and so on and so forth, which creates this loop and generational trauma that is hard to break free from. Corporal punishment can also lead to substance abuse, as well as the affected children may become more accepting to violence well into adulthood as a way to solve problems in their other relationships, romantic, platonic, others. So I may have been going on and on about how bad corporal punishment is and how we shouldn't do it anymore. And we shouldn't. Physical violence in any form has never and will never be a solution to any problem. And it's just important that we as a society learn that. That being said, we also have to give grace. We have to give a little grace to our parents and our elders and teachers, because the truth is it has been overly ingrained in our culture as Africans, and our elders probably don't know any other way of life. They more likely than not experienced worse forms of punishment in their youth. And while that will never be a justification for inflicting pain on their own kids, it makes sense. But that doesn't mean we as a society can't learn and change for the better. There are many more alternative methods of disciplining children and ensuring that they stay humble and guided. Psychologists mostly recommend alternative discipline methods that focus on positive reinforcement, clear communication, and teaching children appropriate behavior. The difference between corporal punishment and positive reinforcement is that corporal punishment focuses on the negative reaction. Like, instead of beating a child when they fail, reward them when they improve in their grades. You see, take away the negative aspect of that and bring in positive reinforcement, because that will enable them to associate the act of reading with a positive reward instead of associating it with a negative reaction in case they fail. Am I making sense? Am I making a little sense? I'm talking like I understand this so much, but I'm also just, learning as I go. Positive reinforcement is all about catching your child when they are being good, praising them for desired behaviors and offering small rewards for following rules, because this will encourage them to repeat the behavior. It may not be easy, but nothing in life is ever easy. And at the end of it all, the children's well-being is the most important. And I think that's actually it for today. I don't know, has this been a shorter video than the last one, or it felt long because I've been working on it for over 2 months, but I've been busy. I thought I would be able to post videos like every other month when I begin, but for now, I hope I can proceed very well into the next one, whichever one it will be. And if you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because I don't know how controversial of a topic this is. I feel like it shouldn't be. The bottom line is, let's not beat our kids. And I don't think there is anything outlandish about not hurting kids, But let me know your thoughts on the video, whether you liked it or not. Of course, like, comment, and subscribe and all that jazz. And I hope I'll see you again in the next one.